Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to Nature Connects. Nature Connects is Massachusetts TNC's webinar series that connects you with scientists, experts, and influencers and our partners from New England and around the world. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Massachusetts State Director and your host, Deb Markowitz. Here at the Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts, we're dedicated to creating a healthier world for all. We work locally and globally using innovative science and scalable, long-lasting solutions to tackle the most complex environmental challenges facing our warming planet. We know that what we do here in Massachusetts to protect nature will mean a better future for people and the planet. To that end, today, we're going to be talking about the Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation's work to both utilize green infrastructure and build a workforce development program to champion it in their community in Dorchester. As we learn more about the power of nature to address urban stormwater runoff pollution problems, there's a growing need for workers who are trained in the construction, inspection, and maintenance of green infrastructure like rain gardens, green roofs, and more. We're going to hear from David Queeley. He's the Director of Eco-Innovation for Codman Square, and Leslie Pond, a research volunteer with TNC. David and Leslie will talk about Codman Square's effort to provide green infrastructure training and job connections for community members, especially people of color and people re-entering the workforce. They'll also share some of what they learned from research into similar programs across the country that will continue to guide this work in Boston. I want to give a special welcome to David Queeley. Dave has a BA from Wesleyan University and training in city and urban planning from Cornell University. He's had a long career in conservation and community development, having got his start as an urban planner for the state of Massachusetts. Dave then spent time as a sanctuary director at Mass Audubon, and he was a VP for community and government relations for the Prospect Park Alliance. He was a VP and senior planner for New Ecology, Inc., and the director of Parks for People Northeast for the Trust for Public Land. David has a consulting business for community sustainability planning, and he's been the director of eco-innovation at the Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation since 2013. Thank you so much for joining us today, David and Leslie. Let me mention, as you think of questions for David and Leslie, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So now let's dive in. To you, David.
Thank you, Deb. Let me share my screen here. And can everybody see that okay?
Looks good.
Hey, technology works once in a while. So thanks a lot for having me here today. As Deb said, I'm Dave Queeley, Director of Eco-Innovation at Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation. We are a community development corporation in Dorchester. We serve the residents of South Dorchester and Mattapan. We've been around for now 40 years, and we started our partnership with the Nature Conservancy about almost 4 years now. And the notion was to, through TNC's North American Cities program and TNC Mass, really create a new type of partnership that had equitable power sharing, was really focused on health and well-being outcomes in underfunded communities, thinking about how to strengthen the institutional capacity of Codman Square, and really how to share information and advance the allied fields of urban conservation and the development of community-based partner organizations like ours. So that has been a very fruitful partnership. We are now kind of coming to the end of it. This webinar is actually one of the last pieces of the work, but I think we will continue in many ways as we move forward. Just to give you a little bit of background about Codman Square NDC and some of the work we do, we did a survey about 10 years ago called Keeping Codman Square Affordable. We started to see a lot of gentrification in the area, and Codman Square, if you've never been there, is a neighborhood that doesn't have some of the kind of basic services that you would come to expect in a neighborhood. It doesn't have a hardware store, even now. Up until recently, it didn't have a coffee shop. So the kind of little things, the little connective tissues that make a neighborhood have been missing there. And then gentrification and COVID has made all of the survey results that you see here has exacerbated all of those things, as you probably read about in the press or maybe have experienced yourselves or know people that have experienced it. We're also in the midst of a 10-year longitudinal study with the Conservation Law Foundation, really looking at the impacts of the built environment on resident health. And so we trained a number of residents to survey their neighbors and to really learn about what's going on in terms of their health and how housing and transit, traffic, those sorts of kind of everyday occurrences that happen to people, how those things are actually impacting their lives. One of the things that we are very conscious of and wary about is the notion of green gentrification, which is something you've probably heard about fairly recently, which is if you improve a neighborhood by greening it, does it attract a different population and begin to displace the people who are there, who really have nowhere to go? Boston's, a lot of the housing policies in Boston have still not really benefited in a great way low-income residents. So we're really trying to be at the forefront of pushing back on that issue. We've been part of a collaborative called the Fairmont Indigo CDC Collaborative, along with Dorchester Bay Economic Development Corporation and Southwest Boston CDC. And there's been a huge focus for us on the Fairmont line, which opened a number of years ago, but really didn't get the ridership it should have had, didn't get the services it should have had. And we're still kind of in the midst of a push to make sure that this form of transit is equitable. If you look at the neighborhood now and you take a bus to go to downtown, the bus takes you about an hour to an hour and a half. If you take the train, it takes 12 minutes to get to South Station. And about 40% of the people that live along the Greenway actually take this train, and ridership has tripled, I think, in the last 5 years. And so it's really a no-brainer that improving and enhancing this line and giving more people access to this line is critical. And also building housing and small businesses near the line really enables people to maybe not need a car, to be able to literally, walk across the street, hop on the train, and be downtown in minutes. And recent improvements have included having Charlie cards, which you use in the subway in Boston. You can use a Charlie card now on the commuter rail. So there's been some progress, but there still needs to be a bit more. Things like electrifying the train line, which would help with diesel fumes and particulate matter, particularly given the neighborhoods you're going through where there's a huge number of people that have asthma. Beginning to address those issues is critical. And here's just a photo of kind of a before and after project of ours. It's near the Four Corners station. It's I think maybe our only cooperative building, so residents will actually have ownership of the residential portion of this building in the next few years.
Excuse me, David, these are great slides. If you can put this on slideshow.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think people will be able to see some of this.
I'm very sorry.
I know, because it was all because we were saying how great it was that technology worked.
Except when I'm involved in it. Okay, that should be better.
Thank you, it's perfect.
All right. So we've also got an urban agriculture site. It's about 20,000 square feet. We've got a particular focus on working with men of color and reentry citizens, people who are court involved or returning from the prison population, and really trying to get them to learn how to work in this world where they have to grow and interact with people and sell and learn a bunch of different social skills. So we've been able to increase the produce production at this site. 2020 we harvested 3,000 pounds, and this next year we're trying to basically triple that. We work by selling the food at very low cost or even giving it away. We sell it outside of our office at local farmers markets. We have a community supported agriculture that started. We now have a hoop house there so we can grow year round. And so we're really starting to make the site produce more than it has in the past. To give you some context of the Eco Innovation District, we have kind of a zoom in here, or a kind of 30,000 foot view. So on the left, you have Franklin Park, that big green space on the left, and then kind of on the upper right is Boston Harbor, so you can kind of see where it is in context. And then as you start to zoom in, you can see where it sits in conjunction to other neighborhoods, and what the key streets that bound the Eco Innovation District are. And then some of the numbers, it's 46 acres, 268 homes now, about 13 blocks, 525 families. About 66% of the residents live out under the poverty line. So, and the unemployment rate for men of color is about 50%. So it's way off of what city or even national standards are, national numbers are. So we've really tried to figure out ways to use the Eco Innovation District and process and partnerships to begin to address some of those problems. In the past few years, we started off very early doing green roofs on bus stops as a demonstration project. 32 rain barrels were installed at resident homes. We had a big focus on retrofitting homes to, again, help people stay in place by insulating their homes. So about 40% of the homes are now retrofit with new insulation. And then there are green infrastructure sites, both on our property, but also on city property. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later. And then we planted about 200 ornamental and fruit trees. And it included trainings for residents and for our staff by Rachel Holmes of the Nature Conservancy. So some of the goals we have are shown here: improve quality of life, cost savings, really begin to improve people's awareness of climate and sustainability and what their environmental awareness is. They already had an interest in this work. We work with TNT, or Talbot Norfolk Triangle area residents. The TNT district is contiguous with the Eco Innovation District, so we worked directly with a community that already had a kind of focus on neighborhood scale sustainability. And we tried to figure out how to scale that up in certain ways and support some of the ideas that they had. They had, for example, worked on turning a vacant lot into a park for about 20 years, and that opened in 2009. So they've had an awareness about this and really want to improve the quality of life for their residents. So focus areas, I mentioned transit-oriented development and retrofits. We spent a fair amount of time, and still do to some extent, getting small businesses to take advantage of 100% now programs that are 100% subsidized. When we started, it was about 70%. We looked at local energy generation. So how can you kind of democratize things like solar, so to benefit a neighborhood? We ended up putting solar on about 16 of our buildings, and so that helps the low-income residents that we serve. And then most recently, we've really been focusing on green infrastructure. So walkability, bikeability, street level, those kind of visible quality of life changes that you can see, including tree planting, beginning to reduce urban heat island effect, bike lanes, traffic calming, and most recently, green infrastructure workforce development. We were chosen as the first slow streets neighborhood in the city of Boston. So slow streets, the idea behind slow streets is to traffic calm down to 20 miles an hour from the typical citywide speed limit of 25, and then begin to put in traffic calming things like chicanes or green islands, where you can begin to both deal with stormwater and deal with urban heat island effect and calm down traffic. So we're really talking about transforming the neighborhood from something like this. And this is kind of an extreme end of the neighborhood. You'll notice there are no sidewalks. The light poles are where the sidewalks should be. On a bad day, there are cars parked on both sides of this street. Excuse me. Leaving it very difficult for buses to get down the street. So we're talking about transforming the neighborhood from something like this to something like this, of course, with neighborhood input and desire. So I'll turn it over to Leslie. Leslie's going to talk a little bit about our green paper research. And so I'll let her take it over. And Leslie, you just tell me when you want me to change slides.
All right, will do. Thank you so much, Dave, and good afternoon, everyone. So with that vision in mind, we went into our research on green infrastructure workforce development with this question. How can it support both economic opportunity and environmental sustainability? starting in the Codman Square neighborhood and hopefully scaling up from there with the intention of creating sustainable jobs for people of color, including young people, and with a focus on men of color. So the next slide shows our approach, which was to first look at programs in other urban areas across the US, and then apply the learnings and success themes that we gleaned to identify potential pathways for Codman Square. And the next slide shows some of the potential benefits of the green infrastructure workforce development programs that we looked at. And we used this triple bottom line framework of people, planet, and profit. So I'd like to highlight just two benefits. First, green infrastructure offers opportunities for entry-level work that can lower barriers to employment for people who are unemployed or underemployed or were previously incarcerated. And also, green infrastructure is a nature-based solution that can increase climate resilience by reducing the risks associated with climate change, such as the urban heat island effect that Dave mentioned, and also pollution from stormwater runoff. And we can talk about the other ones in the Q&A for those who are interested. So the next slide shows the flip side. What are some of the major considerations and challenges that programs have faced? First up is lack of familiarity with green infrastructure, which meant that some communities were really hesitant to consider it as an alternative to traditional gray infrastructure. And then related to this are challenges in obtaining funding or financing for green infrastructure projects. Also, some businesses were less well-versed in securing green infrastructure contracts, and those owned by people of color or women faced additional challenges. Also, as communities increased their green infrastructure and became more desirable places to live, a big issue that Dave mentioned has been gentrification and displacement of people who have lived in those places for many years or even generations. So coming out of the research, a few urban areas stood out to us as potential models for a Codman Square program. And two of these we'll highlight here. These are the large cities, Philadelphia and Washington, DC. And this slide introduces the city of Philadelphia's initiative called Green City Clean Waters, which was started in 2011 to implement green stormwater infrastructure to comply with the Federal Clean Water Act. So the city partnered with Power Corps for the workforce development piece and focused on disconnected young people and people who were previously incarcerated. And alongside the training in green infrastructure installation and maintenance, the program offers work readiness and career support, and really important components of the program. And notably, the Sustainable Business Network in Philadelphia generated reports on the initiative and looking at metrics such as the number and locations of green infrastructure installations, incidences of crime, and they did an estimate of by calculating healthcare costs, which was quite unusual to have those sorts of metrics available. And then the next slide introduces Washington, DC's Clean River project, led by the DC Water Utility. So it has the same goals as Philadelphia's initiative. What DC Water did was to co-develop the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program, which includes classroom training and an exam with the goal of helping to create a professional workforce. And the training is supplemented with hands-on experience. It offers stipends to the participants, as well as additional support components. And it focuses on residents who live in areas with high unemployment. And one other notable feature is that there's a community workforce agreement to ensure that a majority of the workforce includes local residents who are NGICP certified. So the next slide brings us back to Codman Square and the pathways that CSNDC might take to develop a green infrastructure workforce development program. And I won't go into the details here, but on a high level, these include establishing partnerships, creating a business model, identifying synergies within CSNDC, expanding NGICP certification courses to provide a revenue stream, and lastly, continuing to engage and educate residents about green infrastructure. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, you reminded me of a couple of things. So the city of Boston is thinking about creating a green job corps modeled on the Philadelphia Power Corps model. That's still in the nascent stages, but I expect by the end of the year, there will be some version of a green job corps that's really focused on engaging young people 18 and up in jobs, whether that be for helping the city complete capital projects or giving them a training opportunity such as we're offering, or some other opportunities for work and experience. And for me, the DC workforce agreement, the community workforce agreement, is something I'd love to work towards here in Boston. So a couple of just things to note about heat. There's been a lot of focus on resiliency along the coast. The population that we're dealing with clearly is not along the coast, but so heat and stormwater are really the two key climate related factors that we're trying to mitigate or get people educated about and get them working in fields that help mitigate heat. So this is just some facts about heat. I won't read them all in detail, except to say heat related deaths occurred most frequently in urban areas, about 81% of all heat related deaths. And so that's something to keep in mind. If you can't afford an air conditioner, you can't afford a ceiling fan, or you don't have a cooling station nearby, what do? You end up sitting out in the stoop sometimes in order to cool off. And so if you can begin to lower the heat of your entire neighborhood through green infrastructure, tree planting, and other related items, then you begin to really help everybody out collectively. And the city did a heat vulnerability analysis, which basically demonstrated that social factors have a large effect on heat vulnerability. And so how do you begin to do things in the within the social fabric, or within the streets, or within the buildings or communities that help mitigate mitigate urban heat islands, vegetation, green roofs, cool reflective pavements like white pavements. We've been talking about doing that in our organization as well. So how do we begin to really do that on a pretty large scale, and how do you begin to focus on the neighborhoods that need it the most first? I mentioned we had done some urban horticulture. We work with 2 court-involved men of color. In 2017, they were trained by a local landscaper who then, within several weeks, they did it pretty fast, planted 200 trees and shrubs on our properties, including 25 fruit trees in resident yards. We gave people a choice of what kind of tree they wanted, and almost all of them wanted fruit trees. And a lot of them had come from the South, so they wanted peach trees because that was reminiscent of where they'd grown up. We planted a few in our urban agriculture site, but then we started giving folks training. So Rachel Holmes, as I mentioned, trained both Codman Square maintenance staff and residents, and gave the residents a certificate. So we did several of those. I'm still, unfortunately, Rachel, if you're listening, I'm trying to get our staff to stop using tree volcanoes. Still working on that one, but we're getting there. And Jessica Dietrich of TNC Mass and Danilo Morales of my staff did a report measuring the impact of trees from an economic value, energy savings, and CO2 reduction perspectives. We used a program called iTree, and this is just an example of kind of the energy and cost savings from one particular tree. So you can see in terms of stormwater retention, over a 20-year period, 30,000, almost 31,000 gallons of stormwater are retained, a significant amount of pounds of carbon dioxide are kind of sequestered, and there's actually a monetary value for all of these. So if you begin to multiply this by both the trees we planted, but also by existing trees, the existing tree cover, because Jessica looked at that as well, you begin to see these things have a huge impact. And this is a little bit more of the work that Jessica did. So this is looking at lack of tree cover. So the darker red has less tree cover. The lighter it is, the more tree cover there is. And then if you begin, so the Eco Innovation District is, if you can see the railroad tracks kind of here, and the triangles kind of right here of Talbot Ave, New England Ave, and Talbot Ave and New England Ave are two sides of it. If you look at that triangle right in the middle and then begin to overlay it again with particulate matter, you can see that there's actually a correlation between lack of trees and particulate matter in some places. So it's moderate, but it's still, you don't want to be adding any more particulate matter. So, and then I talked a little bit about the slow street zone, slow zone. So we were the first one chosen in the city of Boston. Speed limit goes down to 20 miles an hour. There's signage that tells you you're in a slow zone. There are now speed humps because the residents really wanted there to be some sort of traffic calming. They had asked for it for years. And finally, a young person got hit on a street that, if you were on the street, you wouldn't believe that people speed about 50 miles an hour on a street with cars parked on both sides and a playground on it. But they do, and this young person was hit but survived. But that was kind of the last straw. So we pushed the city on doing something, and they came up with the Slow Zones project. So it includes things like rain gardens or bump outs that can also function as green infrastructure facilities, shortened crosswalks. You know, if you connect the bump outs across a crosswalk, that shortens the crosswalk, increasing pedestrian safety. So there are lots of different ways you can do this, but along New England Avenue is where we are. Actually, some of this work has already started. So they started the work pre-COVID, it stalled because of COVID, but I was just informed that it just started up again. So we are going to have some of the items you see here. There's a rain garden in the upper left, and then sidewalk was removed along this entire stretch between essentially Mallard Ave and Southern Avenue. So sidewalk was removed along the base of the Fairmont line, and that's going to become what's called the bioswale. So not only have you given the land an opportunity to recycle and reclaim water, but you've also removed sidewalk that creates urban heat island effect. And so there are a couple of there's another small rain garden plan for the end of Mallard Avenue, and kind of an edge, a green edge as you turn on to Southern Avenue, but again, a shortened crosswalk there. So you can begin to, if you begin to do this and recreate this in different neighborhoods, pretty soon you're really having a huge impact. So it's not only here that we're talking about can we recreate these islands of green elsewhere in the city, and how do we do that, and how do we coordinate that? Leslie mentioned our green infrastructure training. So I got certified as a green infrastructure practitioner in 2017 under the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program. Danilo and I got certified as trainers in 2019. We just held our first remote cohort of 8 people in December. 7 of them took the exam and 5 of them passed. And then we just finished our second cohort about a week ago of 10 people, and their exam will be pending in the next few weeks, I imagine. And we have a 2021 goal of getting 3 classes completed with a goal of graduating 30 people. And then of course, a significant number of them, if they pass, that's a plus. We are kind of teaching a population that some of the other practitioners I know aren't teaching. They're teaching professionals, so they're getting 100% pass rates. I feel like 71% is pretty good for our first class. We'd like to get that higher, obviously, but teaching to folks who have had no idea what green infrastructure is or any awareness of it, I think is pretty good. And we've been able to get people jobs as well. We've been making the road by walking it to some extent. And so we've not only been doing the trainings, but we've been trying to figure out who in this field could actually offer employment to people. So we've done 2 things. One is partnering with the Mass Clean Energy Center on an internship program that pays both the employer and the employee money to basically be matched together and then see if it's a good fit. There are 2 programs. One's a 6-week program in the spring and the fall, and a summer internship program is 10 weeks. So it's a great option for both sides in order to check each other out and actually earn some dollars doing so. And then we've actually been able to partner with a couple of green roof companies who we introduced to the internship program. So one of them has hired one of our first cohort graduates full-time, and has hired another one who had no work experience in terms of manual labor, has hired her part-time. And so, and they've said to me, hey, we would love more of your folks to come and work for us. So that's been a plus as well. But we've got to do more in terms of finding people real jobs with a good living wage and a ladder of success. And then I've got a couple more slides after this, but this is just really a way to show you what it's taken to kind of get to this point. Partnerships are a key piece of our work. They say it takes a village. I think you can see it takes a pretty large village or a small city in order to make this work. So I will stop share for a second and go to another couple of slides that give you a sense of the universe or the ecosystem of how this all fits together. There's a graduate student named Wynn Constantini at MIT who's done this amazing, I call them mind maps, but done an amazing mind map of how this all fits together. And I'm only going to show you a kind of small chunk of it because it's so it's so huge. Let me see if I can do this real quickly. And if I can't, I'll just send it out later. All right. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so this is just a small piece of the mind map, but you can kind of see we're kind of down here at the bottom in terms of how we tie into the Green Infrastructure Workforce Development Program, how we're teaching it. But Boston Water and Sewer is connected to this. They have about 30 years worth of projects that they would like to do or have to do because of an EPA consent decree. And so they are going to be, doing more green infrastructure projects, but also monitoring what's out there. There are over 2,000 green infrastructure projects in the city right now. And so someone needs to monitor them and maintain them and make sure that they're working so that they're contributing to Boston Water and Sewer's reductions of phosphorus, for example, going into, in its stormwater system. But this is just a whole, I'm only showing you probably a quarter of this whole mind map. So anyway, you can kind of see how it all fits together. We've thought about creating a worker-owned co-op to do this work or an LLC to do the work or both. I think there's room for both to kind of, to do some sort of work in this field. So anyway, this just gives you a sense of who some of the partners are. More to go and more to come, but I will stop there. And I think we're going to do questions and answers now.
Well, thank you so much, David. That was really fabulous. And thank you, Leslie. I have been hearing about this project behind the scenes. And what I really appreciated was seeing how this fits into that larger vision about the community of Dorchester and what it could look like. And one of the things I was curious about as I was listening to you is whether or not you're feeling that with the pandemic and the fact that there's been a real focus on kind of the green haves and have-nots. How if you're in a neighborhood that has green space, you've experienced a very different pandemic than folks who don't have, trees and parks and green areas to go to. Do you feel like there's a new attention or extra attention on the work you're doing? Are you hopeful that the COVID experience will help supercharge some of this, or?
I am. I'm hopeful that it will. I know that there's federal money kind of coming down the pike and that term infrastructure right now is being bandied about in different ways.
Yeah.
But, I like that, President Biden said, it's not just bridges and roads, it's essentially social infrastructure or human infrastructure. And so how do we support that?
And so that actually is very well put. So that's what I was trying to think about too, is that what you're doing is you're combining thinking about actual physical infrastructure, green and hardened, right? Redoing roads and traffic calming, plus, adding green and trees and so forth, but you're also really focused on social infrastructure. And I wonder, when you're doing this work, are there city and neighborhood role models that you can draw on as you're thinking about how do you do this combined, work of building the infrastructure of the community by creating good paying jobs and a workforce that's actually pretty needed right now?
Mhm. Yeah, I think there are pieces of it in different places. Leslie mentioned the work that PowerCore is doing in Philadelphia, and DC has a great community benefits model, a community benefits agreement. So I think it's going to take a combination of different things that exist but may not exist here. I'm really excited about, I'm calling it the Green Job Corps. I'm not sure if that's the actual name, that Councillor Wu and Councillor Bach are putting together, because I think that's got some huge potential as well. So I think the pieces are probably there or they're coming, but we have to kind of have a comprehensive vision of how it all can work and what the pathway could be, or what the pathways, because I think there are more than one. If you saw all of WIN's mind map, you'd see there are a ton of different routes for people to go. There's a whole section around landscaping, and there's a whole section around water, people getting pushed into or learning about water jobs, because a lot of people are aging out of
Right.
doing water and sewer jobs. So who's going to replace them? And so, and then there's a role for potentially for unions or worker-owned cooperatives too. So there's the sky's the limit, I think, and I think now is really the time to be pushing on this.
Yeah, that's great. And making the connection between this infrastructure money that's coming that, is, being thought of very expansively. And so maybe that's a good opportunity to leverage for the workforce development, but also, as you said, you can develop all the workforce you want, but there's got to be jobs for them to end in, good paying,
Exactly.
livable wage jobs with the future. So that in combination. So Leslie, you've done a lot of work at the nexus of health and the environment. Was there anything that came up in your research and on other green workforce development programs that we could learn from that highlighted this connection?
Sure. I'd say one example is the Sustainable Business Network in Philadelphia, where they did a fairly involved calculation to look at health-related cost savings as a benefit of the open space projects that were part of the Green City Clean Waters initiative. So they basically surveyed about 50 green infrastructure firms that were involved. And what they came to is an estimate of, I believe it was about $50 million in annual savings.
Wow.
Across, I think about 150 or 170,000 residents that lived within a certain area around these locations. I think there were almost 100 locations that they surveyed for. And so I think that is an exception though, and that most programs, report more on statistics such as the number of participants, their graduation rates, and where they went next. And so I think it's hard to get that more long-term data on health outcomes for program participants or their communities. But I will just say that studies beyond the green infrastructure workforce development space have shown that factors such as income level and place of residence, of course, among many other factors, will impact health, and that urban green space has benefits for physical and mental health.
That's great. So we got a couple questions specific to the National Green Infrastructure Certification. So Adina Masliansky asks, how long is the National Green Infrastructure Certification program, and how many times can you take the exam if you don't pass the first time. And then there's also a question about what you're hearing from participants in the National Green Infrastructure Certification Program trainings. Do people find it helpful? Do community members, partners, what's the general sense of it?
Yeah, great questions. So the certification program's 35 hours. So we tried the first time to teach it over the course of 2.5 weekends. So we taught it on a Saturday, Sunday, and a Saturday. That was pretty exhausting for us as trainers because we basically worked for 20 straight days without a break. And so this time we did a Tuesday and Thursday nights and then a Saturday. So we broke it up a little bit differently, which gave everybody a little bit more breathing room. So in terms of if you do not pass the exam, you can't retake it for, I believe it's 4 months. And then you can retake it again, but you do have to pay the fee to take it. So it's $200 to take it. We had been trying to subsidize people, both for the cost of the class, which is based on when I took it, it's $700, $500 of which is the class fee and $200 of which goes to NGICP, which is now run by a company called EnviroCert. So NGICP was under the Water Environment Federation. Now it's being run by EnviroCert. Literally this month it's transitioned over, and we're in the midst of cleaning up all the details about that. So.
Yeah, so it's a real investment. I didn't realize that that is significant. So as part of your program, you've worked on subsidizing it, but the folks who are part of it do have some skin in the game, like they're also paying out of pocket.
Well, so part of the partnership with TNC enabled us to subsidize the first cohort. We started asking for, I'll call it a donation this last time. So some people paid, some people did not, but we're probably going to, for the third class, which will happen in July, have a fee schedule of some kind, because we've got to start covering our costs for taking this, or teaching this class.
And if it's going to be sustainable over time, it makes sense to have some sort of financial model.
Absolutely.
Takes into account need, however, right?
Yeah, and I think you can take it as many, I think to answer that first question, I think you can take it as many times as you want with the caveats that I just mentioned.
David Morgan asked, can you speak more to the connection of worker cooperatives to social infrastructure and workforce development?
So worker-owned cooperatives is something we haven't done before. We're actually just learning about them. In the course of the last couple of years, I reached out to unions to see if, number one, does this fit in any kind of bucket that unions already have? And I didn't get a clear answer on that. There may still be a way for it to fit in, under a union bucket, which is obviously under President Biden's much more important. So we don't really know yet how to set up the worker-owned cooperative. There's a group called BCCO, Boston. I'm not going to get it right. Anyway, they help people set up worker-owned cooperatives. And so we've met with them once. I'm actually about to meet with them again in the next couple of weeks to really try to flesh out what it could look like in the instance of what we're trying to do. Yeah.
And then it sounds like as a practical matter, if there's a worker-owned cooperative, then the workers themselves would be contracted to work on a variety of projects for a variety of the potential employers.
Right, and I think there's a role for an LLC there too to do some of the same thing, or maybe the LLC morphs into a worker-owned cooperative. So right now I'm exploring all of the options.
Yeah, that's great. So I am curious, what policies would you like to see enacted at the state level or the city level that would help boost green infrastructure, and programs like this, like the job development piece is pretty key.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see a community agreement like they have in DC, but one of the things I've started talking to the city about a little bit is, are there, which departments that are doing green infrastructure, which is basically Parks, Boston Transportation, Public Works, and Boston Water and Sewer, which ones are kind of more likely, at least initially, to have a policy that says, for example, this is just an example, if we are doing a project and we send out a procurement notice for people to do the construction work, they get more points in our ranking system for having people on their staff or for the contractor themselves to be NGICP certified. So it begins to incentivize contractors to have this certification in the mix, either themselves or to begin to bring people on that have this certification. One of the things I just did 2 days ago was reaching out to Public Works, for example, about the green infrastructure that's supposed to be happening on New England Avenue and is restarted now. I said, well, is there a way for us to get, we've now graduated, a number of people, some of whom are certified. Is there a way for us to get some of those folks working for your contractors who are doing this green infrastructure work? So you begin to give them some work experience, some, some dollars, but also help the city address some of its track record in terms of hiring, minority hiring.
Yeah, that's great. So, we know that's work in other places, having some some requirements of minority hiring. I know it's a little more complicated, requiring locational hiring, like hiring of people only, who've come from those communities. That's a little constitutionally trickier, but we've got a couple of other questions. Russ Cohen asks, hi, Dave, that's great to hear that you were able to plant fruit trees as part of your project. I'm curious to know what you planted. Are the trees big enough to produce fruit? And if so, is the fruit picked for distribution along with other produce you're growing, or is the fruit available for anyone in the neighborhood to pick and eat?
Hi, Russ. It's been a while since we've spoken, but so the fruit trees were both planted on people's individual property, so it's really for them to enjoy. We haven't had kind of a community fruit situation. We have 4 peach trees that were planted on our urban ag site, and those started producing fruit right away. I mean, the trees are not huge, but they're just producing huge peaches. We ended up actually sending one of them to one of the funders of this project. She really enjoyed it.
I bet she did. An immediate benefit.
Yeah.
Russ follows up by saying, considering all we're hearing about the critical ecological functions and values of native species, I'm wondering if there might be an increased role for them in planting around the city. After all, a native species should be of equivalent effectiveness in mitigating urban problems like the heat island effect, stormwater management, etc.
I agree. I think we had at least a couple of people wanted Bartlett pears, which I think were developed here in Massachusetts or in Boston. So
that's great.
I think that's about as native as you can get.
Yeah. We also have a question. Are residents walking and getting outside more in the areas that the traffic calming work was done? Are you already seeing results?
I think people feel safer now. And I know that TNT had instituted some sort of a neighborhood walking program. There's also a group that we had put together for women specifically. And so they've been walking for a few years all around the neighborhood. And then fairly recently, in the last couple of years, there's been a signage program that actually tells people the walking and biking time from point A to point B, points of interest within the neighborhood. So, and they're thinking about, I think there's an attempt right now to expand that to the Fairmount Greenway, which is the green ribbon that basically parallels the railroad tracks, but connects green nodes like our urban agriculture site. So in community gardens and other parks. So there's an attempt, I think, that's coming pretty soon to put signage along that route as well.
That's great. I know that would help me too. I bet folks listening would say, hey, that's knowing how much time it's supposed to be. Then also you can measure your own quickness. Are you meeting that average? But then it's maybe quicker than taking the bus, for example, in some cases. Leslie, I don't know if folks are aware that you have a background in biomedical research, and I always, it's been so lovely getting to know you as you've worked at TNC as a volunteer, first in AmeriCorps and now in a volunteering capacity. It really has been just wonderful having you. And I thought folks might be interested in hearing how you became interested in the environment, having been, a biomedical hotshot, shall we say, and how these interests are really connected for you.
Thanks for that question, Deb. Well, I think it goes back to even when I was a child and my parents, they come from a farming background. And so I've had this appreciation for nature for ever so long. And I also love photography. So I'm an amateur photographer and I really love nature photography. So this has been a lifelong journey. And a few years ago, I just had the opportunity to start thinking about, what do I want to do differently? And, the first thing that came to mind was the environment and climate change. I mean, how could I not engage on that? And so I started attending seminars and just getting to know more about the work. And I happened to meet someone who opened some doors for me and I got introduced to people from Nature Conservancy, and it just took off from there. So it's been wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for all your work for us. And actually, for all of you watching, you heard her story. You start with coming to webinars, and who knows where it ends up for you. You know where to reach us if you want to volunteer. We have a question back to the certification. David, you said you were a pilot for the National GI Certification Program. What kinds of feedback are you giving to that national program to help inform its development?
That's a great question. We haven't really given any because we've been so busy trying to ramp up and do the teaching.
Yeah.
I think with this new company EnviroCert running things, that they are actually encouraging that. So they are looking for feedback. They're looking for people to participate on committees as they set up different trainings. So they are a great group in terms of, because they basically do trainings in lots of different places, different types, all environmental, of course, but so this is their thing. So they've got this down to a science. And so I think there are going to be many opportunities for us to give them input and feedback and vice versa.
There's also I think a really important question. This is only going to be successful if there's community buy-in. Are there ways that you have talked about this that helped get the community excited about this work? And then I also wonder, is it the same message with the businesses and the city, the folks who really have to have buy-in in order to hire the people who are being trained?
Yeah. So we've, when we reach out for a class or a training, we have a list of about 4,000 individuals or entities that we send out our mailings to, but we also have a network of community groups in the neighborhood. So they're informed about these. We let them know about what's happening. I loop them into my conversations this week, TNT into my conversations this week with Public Works. So it's their neighborhood. It's not our neighborhood. It's not my neighborhood. I live, 10 minutes away, but I'm not in Dorchester. And so how do you begin to ensure that they are included in these conversations is critical. So we continually update them. We talk about what we're doing at the Codman Square Neighborhood Council sometimes, because that's a huge gathering place. Even though it's been virtual for the last year, that's where a lot of community leaders and entities come together to hear about what's going on, not just in their small subset of the area, but what's going on in Codman Square in general and Dorchester in general. So it's a great opportunity for us to kind of get the word out about what we're doing.
That's great. I think we have time for just one last question, and I think it would be helpful for you to share any thoughts you have about how the folks listening could help to elevate the importance of nature and green infrastructure and this kind of sustained community investment to more people with influence. Like, how can we help? This is a great project. What can we do to help?
Great question. We'll certainly go to our website and see what's going on there. This work is featured prominently on the website, but there are things like the roadmap bill, which recently passed. And so the devil is going to be in the details about how that money gets spent. For example, there's $12 million a year that the state will be distributing for green work or workforce development. So where it goes and who gets it and will it get to the communities most in need first is really going to be critical. So beginning to advocate, to your reps and senators, to public officials, key public officials is going to be important. I think making sure that residents are on the committees and boards that are making these decisions is going to be critical. So advocating for that. We've been working with a great group of doctors called Climate Code Blue, who have just been great in terms of being all in on supporting some of the work that we're doing. And so more of that is certainly critical and necessary.
Yeah, that's great.
And thinking about things like the HERO legislation that's not passed yet, which is based on a doubling of the transfer tax, real estate transfer tax at the time of a sale. And so again, how does that money get distributed? Who gets it? Who gets to decide? Those are the kind of the key questions that people need to involve themselves in and support us on.
And make sure the right voices are in the room during these conversations. I mean, I
Absolutely.
think probably critical. Well, thank you so much, both David and Leslie, for spending this hour with us. It's really exciting to see the culmination of what's been a really interesting process and partnership. I personally have really enjoyed getting to know you and getting to know your work, and I'm looking forward to continuing the relationship into the future. You should note that we have some information in the chat that is a link to the Codman Square website. So if you want to get involved and want to help out in some way, you can take a look at that link and know how to get in touch. I want to thank everyone for being with us today. Thank you so much for your support of the Nature Conservancy and our partner organizations. Your support's what makes all of this work possible. We're going to be sending everyone a follow-up email over the coming days with links to the resources we talked about today and a recording of this webinar. And if you're enjoying our webinars, please share them with your friends. You can also follow us on social media at conserve_MA on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with our work and get updates on upcoming virtual opportunities to connect with us. Also, please join us Thursday at noon. We're going to have a fascinating discussion about renewable energy in New England, featuring experts on solar and wind from TNC. You won't want to miss these webinars, so please register to secure your spot at nature.org/MA webinars. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you again, David and Leslie. It's been just wonderful having you. I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.